We're excited to welcome today Dennis Corcoran from the Leadership Roundtable, and we're talking to specifically new campus ministers, people who are in their first through fifth years. And Dennis, we know that you bring a wealth of expertise and insight to ministry in general, but also administration and management. So welcome, and why don't we just jump right in with essentially the core question of why would a campus minister even be concerned with best practices in terms of administration?
And that's a great question to start with, Mike, because most of us who have gotten involved in ministry didn't get involved because we love administration and doing management. That was certainly the case for me. But I think understanding that they're flip sides of the same coin, and having an appreciation for the role that management plays is what matured me in the ministry. I can see that as an adversarial relationship. So for early on as a youth minister, for people that were looking at my timesheets or making decisions about my budget and things like that, I could see as the enemy if I wanted to. But when I realized that how I relate with them and how I relate with my own responsibility of management and understanding the system, then that becomes an advantage for my ministry. When I understood that connection, how I do the management piece does affect how I'm able to minister, that engages me more in the management piece and seeing as part of flip side of the same coin.
Should we see management as a dirty word, as kind of a negative connotation?
Yeah, it has been seen that way, especially in church circles. I mean, if I had a dime for every time someone says, we're not corporate America, and I always say, I know we're not, but we are a system that operates with some of the same principles. And if we can use best practice in understanding finance and understanding evaluation and understanding personnel and budgets and all of those things and do that well, that's the business side of church. There is a business side of every ministry, every aspect of ministry. I don't care what it is. My strong belief is that there is relationship involved in every ministry and there is management involved in every ministry.
Let's talk about the relationship piece. So much of ministry is this idea where I'm in relationship, I'm serving people, I'm a steward of time, and I'm interruptible. Yeah. And we often talk about the open door policy, and yet that can sidetrack our productivity. Sure. What are some best practices just in terms of communicating well with the people we're serving?
Yeah, and that comes back to, I think, an overall understanding of the system that you're in. All of us are ministering within a system and a culture. And the more we can dissect that and play with it even and understand it, the better off we are. I always use the example of, why is the pizza and bagels different in Brooklyn, New York than they are in Little Rock, Arkansas? And it's because of things like water and oven temperature and all of those things and altitude and all of that. So that has to be considered, and therefore you want to be deliberate is the term that I use. You want to be as deliberate as possible in managing that. So for people, understanding that people are going to interrupt you, and interruption is your ministry. For that person that needs you, that comes through the door unannounced, without an appointment, you can't say, check with the person outside and come back. Especially in campus ministry, that's not going to work. But if you just sit and wait for the interruptions, then you're also not being productive. So balancing that, I know, is very tricky, but play with it, be deliberate, look back at your time, spend time looking back at your past month. How much of that month of your days were just dealing with interruption? How much of that was dealt with planning? How much of that did you review best practice? Whatever it might be, to learn. I think we're certainly on the cusp of understanding, rather than using the word failure. I think it's Jordan Peterson who uses the term, I realize now that I didn't fail. I just had opportunities to learn. When we approach it that way, that we're going to be in ministry, if someone would have told me I've been in ministry more than 30 years, I would have told them they were crazy when I started. But look at all the learning that I've had an opportunity to do. And as a result, then, I spend some time looking back and being able to say, how can I do this better? And if we're being deliberate and taking steps like that, I think then there's a snowball effect that can happen in ministry.
So being proactive and not just reactive.
Yes.
Many campus ministers, especially those that are going to be watching this video, they tell us that they feel overwhelmed, by information overload, phone calls, email, etc. What's a general concept in terms of somebody leaves you a message? How much time should pass before I respond? How about emails, things like that?
Yeah. So the big thing is being able to communicate that. I think, and I might be alone in this, but I really do believe that every system eventually adapts to its leader. So if you have someone that says, I promise you any email or phone call will be returned within 48 hours, I think then people get used to the idea that I'll get a call back. And if it's not 48 hours, that gives me another opportunity to go back. Other people will say, I will get back to you within 12 hours. I think if someone said, I will get back to you within a week, that might not be best practice. But I think, again, people would adapt. The problem ends up being for the minister who isn't returning 10 phone calls to anyone, and then is returning someone's email instantly, and then there's 5 that they didn't get to because it was 3 days ago and that was a busy day. Again, being deliberate. That's whenever I'm coaching, I try to get ministers to understand tell me that you have a plan that you're playing with, that you're trying to put into place, as opposed to just doing it as the wind blows. A lot of his experienced ministers who just do it as the wind blows. And at the end of the year, someone says to them, how did you do? And they say, I don't know, because I was just going with the wind. There has to be a little bit of going with the wind, especially in campus ministry, right? But there has to be some deliberate. I have to have a plan. I have to know where I'm headed. I have to know what I try to achieve this year. What did success look like? I think is a great question.
Let's talk about meetings. We have to attend so many meetings. Some of them are great. Most of them aren't so great.
Correct.
What makes a meeting effective?
Sure. Knowing what the point of the meeting is. I have honestly, very recently, canceled a meeting because I realized that it seemed like a good idea. Everyone said, let's meet to discuss this, right? But meanwhile, the closer the meeting got, there was just too much gray as to what the point of the meeting is.
So you just canceled it.
Just canceled it. Because and then when people react to that, say, why did you think that? Why was this meeting important for you? Help me understand why this meeting was important. Well, because of that. Oh, well, that wasn't on the agenda for that meeting. So it's possible we would have had that meeting and never gotten to that. That's good. Let's plan a meeting for that. Whatever it might be, there has to be an understanding as to the why. Why are we? And then once you know the why, then what needs to be achieved, and that's how you make an agenda for it. I also try never to go to a meeting without an agenda. Now, I'll make exceptions for that, especially if someone just says it's a think tank. Okay, well, now I understand it's a think tank meeting. But when someone says this is a meeting to plan whatever, okay, then somebody has to have done some behind-the-scenes work to say, then this is what we need to talk about. Because when you come together and everybody just starts staring at each other or just talking about whatever they want to, then people say this was a waste of time. And when you leave a meeting saying that was a waste of time, trying to get me back to that meeting is going to be very, very difficult. And we know that, especially with busy college students. I'm sure there's let's have a campus ministry meeting about what to achieve what and what's the time frame. So it's going to be a 20-minute meeting to do X. It's going to be a 1-hour meeting to achieve Y. It has to be measured, time frame, and it needs to have a very clear agenda. So at the end we say, okay, this was a good meeting because here's what I think we got accomplished. And people say, wow, yes, we couldn't have gotten that accomplished without having that meeting. We all love to go to meetings like that, where we say that was worthwhile.
Yeah, the worst thing is you don't want people to leave a meeting and say, what was the point of this meeting? Or we could have just sent an email or a memo or something like that.
I used to go to parent meetings for school, and I used to always lean into the parent sitting next to me and say, this was a superintendent email. This was not you didn't need to bring all parents out and have us cancel all of our, to inform us that there's going to be a new lunch program.
Right.
You could have sent out an email. You're not asking for my input. You're not asking for anything. The fact that you've called me to a meeting is a complete waste of time, which is why then the next superintendent meeting had very few people at it.
Right. So people who are watching this, they're going to start getting excited about management, about administration and kind of the ministry of administration. With that said, we also want them out and about with students on campus.
Right.
So what are some best practices or even tips or suggestions for how somebody can manage their desk work, quote unquote, which just needs to be done in an average week? Maybe that's 1 hour, maybe it's 5 hours, whatever, with getting out. How do they schedule time out on campus?
Yeah.
What works?
So I think that as long as we look through the lens, which lens do I prefer to look through? Do I prefer to look through a management lens to get a relationship? That's uncomfortable for a lot of people. I prefer to do it as a relationship lens that requires management. So look at it through the relationship lens. If you're a campus minister, then you need to have some time where you are planning the relationship with the system, with the culture, and you need to be sure that that is set up from within, the relationship that is within. But if the students are outside of your building, then you have to be deliberate about how am I going to spend time out, and where am I going to spend that time, and when am I going to spend that time. But I do believe it's all about relationship. You can't be a successful minister in any church environment without successful relationships. So then at least if we recognize that those relationships do need to be deliberate and they need to be managed, that can give us an additional perspective within the lens of relationship. Where when I'm dealing with people and just want to coach them through the management piece, I've realized that that's where the resistance comes in, because they're like, I didn't get into this to do management. Okay, then don't look at it through the management lens. Look at it through the relationship lens. I need to spend time at this or at that, and I need to understand the culture in this university or in this college within which I'm being asked to work. And once you start to say, I'm going to do some of this outside and do this, again, to achieve what goal? And then I'm going to do some of this inside planning. I'm going to make some phone calls to another campus minister or something like that. I keep using the phrase, but I'm learning in my own style right now in our crazy culture of information overload and everyone doesn't have a lot of time on their hands. Being deliberate about our time at work, if you will, has tremendous advantages as opposed to showing up and saying, now what am I going to do?
Just winging it.
Just winging it.
No, I like that. So the lens of relationships, being deliberate. How about the role of mentors? For our new campus ministers, should they seek out mentors? If so, whom and how?
Yeah, and not only seek out the mentors, but then, I know I'm hammering a nail here, but be deliberate about that. So I have talked to ministers, even campus ministers, who have gone to a conference, and they come back and I say, hey, how was that conference? And they say, it was great. There were so many other ministers there, and we just had a great time. And I say to myself, okay, at what point in time did you go to the ones who have been successful, that you've heard great things, and say, hey, I heard about this program that you're doing, connecting the Sunday Eucharist to Game of Thrones. I mean, that threw a curveball to a lot of folks in campus ministry. That was their time to be able to have Eucharist. And what other TV shows have we had on Sunday nights, right? And all of a sudden Game of Thrones came on Sunday nights at 9 o'clock Eastern time. Well, when are most liturgies on a campus? 10 o'clock. That was a curveball that they had to deal with. But you know what? Find out the ones who then were doing, King of Kings or Christ the King, then Game of Thrones or something, and advertising the idea to set that aside needs to have a little bit of an adjustment there, right? But going after someone who has been successful, best practice, and saying, I've heard this. If you were in my situation facing this, what would you do? And then gaining some good insight, not recreating the wheel. There are successful, highly successful people in every field, even in the church field, and therefore seeking them out and saying, I've heard this about your program. Now let me share what I'm facing. Could you give me some advice? And that's what I do think like conferences and things like that are for. It's great to just catch up with someone over a beer or a drink or something like that. But I also think there's a time to be able to say, I want to have a meal with you. And at that meal, I want to pick your brain. Would it be okay? I mean, I was a church brat, I call myself. I had no fear. I'd go up to some people. They say, oh, I'm even afraid talking to. I'd go up and say, do you have any time for a meal with me? And then that's how I learned. That's how I gained. But I didn't waste their time to just say, hi, how are you? I came and said, you know what? I heard you had a lot of success in that scripture program. I heard you had a lot of success in this, in the social aspect of how to incorporate, or in the Eucharist aspect.
Yeah, I have a particular question for you, and some mentor relationships can be fleeting, and some can endure for many years, and that's okay.
Sure.
I think, we all go to conferences, you get the speaker lineup, why not take a highlighter out and say, I would love to have 5 minutes with this person, or a cup of coffee with that person.
Or an email.
Or
if
an
that person's too busy, then you do an email, back with that person or something. There are those that said to me, Dennis, anything I can ever do to help, please don't hesitate to circle back. Well, don't say that to me, because I will circle back. And then there were those that I got the idea that they answered my question, they looked at their watch and kind of went, Dennis, thank you so much, all the best to you. And then, all the best to you, it meant that was a fleeting thing. You got whatever you got out of it, but chances of getting time with that person again might not be, so achievable, because they are a busy person, they're successful, so therefore they're only going to give you so much time. But if you have someone that is in a university or a college campus that's close by you, that has had tremendous success, and you can kind of take them on and, hey, do you mind if I come take you to lunch 3 times during the year and bounce some questions off you and stuff like that? Very, very valuable. Yeah.
Let's talk about professional boundaries. Well, let's say somebody says, I really need to talk. It's something kind of sensitive.
Right.
And you make the decision that it's okay to meet one-on-one with a person in your office. Should there be a window on the door? Should the door be cracked open? What's a good
Yeah, I think that, certainly within the whole safe environment, and I guess a college campus minister wouldn't have that as much. You do have to determine whether this is someone over 18 years old or whether someone under 18 years old. Obviously, we have the rules now that if it's under 18 years old, it has to be, the door has to be open. There has to be, no glass on the, clouded glass on the window and things like that. I would imagine for over 18, that would have to be, having someone right in the room outside, even if the door is closed, might be a good practice. We have to think about these things, and but on the other hand, I have been in the presence of someone that has had a traumatic incident in their life, and they're feeling so vulnerable that to then have you out in the open at a Starbucks is not going to work, with them sobbing and everything like that. So you want to find a space where there might not be a lot of other people, but there might be someone that is just, hey, you know what, I need to speak to this person privately. Hey, I need to speak to this person privately. In 20 minutes, just check in on me, or something like that. That there's some checks and balances there, right? Yeah. And again, that goes along with it's tricky right now in our society. So balancing and then learning from that, and trying to recognize that just because someone is emotional, you also need to keep those boundaries, and that's a really tricky one, Mike. I know in our society today, to become sterile to that environment does us in, but meanwhile, sending mixed signals and putting someone in a position that isn't a safe environment because of their emotional situation is also taking advantage of them, and you got to be really careful with that.
Sister Angie Shaughnessy told me one time, she said, a good guideline in terms of, best practices on just boundaries and things like that is, what would a reasonable person think, say, and do?
That's
and
right.
So if it looks like a reasonable situation, then it probably is okay. Yeah. But if it looks like it's late at night, one-on-one, dark space, it doesn't feel reasonable, it doesn't look good, and probably something bad is going to come of that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the terms that gets used right now is credible accusation, right? So therefore, I am always looking and saying, with this environment that I've just set up, could this person misconstrue something to the point where it would be considered a credible accusation because of the circumstances? And therefore, if I say, oh, yeah, they could, then I need to change the environment. Also being conscious of the fact that privacy, if it's needed for this person that's dealing with a highly emotional situation or whatever, but you also need to be able to, have safe boundaries.
No question. Yeah. Last question, we're so grateful for your time and expertise, just deals with wellness. And we want campus ministers, they're working many hours. The last research that we did showed that most campus ministers are working well over 50 hours a week, which is a bit of a caution piece there. But how do we stay healthy for the long term? How do we make sure that physically, emotionally, spiritually, we can continue to do this ministry for a number of years?
Right. And again, that would be becoming deliberate with the whole year. You know, I like to look at a year. Seasons happen, you know, annually for most of us, and therefore looking at the entire year and having a plan for wellness, I think, has always been an important thing, at least for me as a minister as well. So when am I on vacation?
Mm-hmm.
Who am I on vacation with? How am I interacting with that? Do I need me time, alone time? Am I doing family time? Am I doing, you know, whatever, and having that kind of planned out, and then looking at it. So besides looking at it annually in terms of vacation time, away time, where you're unplugged from the ministry, you need to do that. No phone, no availability. There's someone else on call, and obviously if it's an emergency at a campus, you'd want to be clued in. But unless it's an emergency, right now for the next week, so-and-so will be handling, or this office will handle any inquiries or whatever, and then looking at it within a month frame and then within a weekly frame. What am I doing? How am I feeding myself? You know, as an individual, what types of prayers? You know, the prayers we say shape the lives we live. So therefore, what kind of prayers? I don't have the same prayers, you know, in my 50s that I had in my 20s. I needed different kind of prayer experiences with the ministry I was doing in my 20s than what I'm doing now in my 50s. So having an awareness like that, I've always had a spiritual director, someone that I've met with just about my spiritual and religious wellness, and touching base with them and meeting with them on a regular basis has been tremendously helpful. But, you know, on the other end of that, Mike, honestly, is this idea of, you know, it's a great line from Sister Jose Habde, who said, you know, so many people say they're burnt out, and I think that there has to be a flame there to begin with in order to be burnt out. So then I see a lot of people that kind of, I'm exhausted, and it's their own wellness that's causing that. It's not the job. The job is the job, and it's, you know, and it has an ebb and flow to it that can be figured out. But when you are not dealing with your own self-awareness, your own wellness, that's going to then creep into, you know, and someone's coming back because they're not sleeping, they're not eating well, they don't have a prayer life that is sustaining them. And as a result, then they come into the ministry saying, I'm just exhausted. Well, you're exhausted all the time. This is not you're exhausted because you just worked a hard week. Listen how many times you say I'm exhausted. That's always a good indicator. You know, am I saying that more than once a year? I think everyone's entitled to say, I'm exhausted. I just finished Holy Week. I just finished the retreat, the big retreat during the campus year. You know, whatever it might be, and I'm exhausted. You're entitled to that once a year. If you're saying that every week, there's a wellness problem, and that needs to be addressed then with a personal plan to how to address that. It's not your work as much as it's your personal life, and they both need to be attended to.
It's okay to ask people that you trust to be kind of your accountability check-in person. You know, I have people that I say to them, text me, you know, just once a week, just check in with me. That really helps. Your day off is really crucial. It's non-negotiable. If you're not taking your day off, it's a real problem. You're going to pay the piper at some point. Maybe one last question is, what makes for a good day off in 30 or 60 seconds?
Yeah, doing what you love. You know, and yes, people will then say, I love my ministry. And that's great, which is why they give the excuses they don't do the day off. No. You have to have something else that you love just besides your ministry. A hobby, something you enjoy going to the movies, or do you enjoy walking on the beach? You enjoy wherever you are, going to the mountains, going to the park, whatever it might be, you know, and doing that on your day off and looking forward to that. There's nothing wrong with looking forward to doing something on your day off. That's what enables you to unplug. And having that, again, it's a plan. You have to know what you're going to do on your day off. If you say, I'm just going to sleep all day on my day off, then maybe you need 2 days off. You know, I don't know. But there has to be some kind of, you know, balance. That's what we're all looking for. There has to be balance between what we're doing in our personal life and then what we're doing in our ministry. And one affects the other.
Great. Thanks so much for being our guest.
It was
really
just a pleasure to be here. And I wish everybody in their early years great success.
Thanks, Dennis.